My name is Maria Fernanda. I'm a white-skinned woman, brown eyes. I'm 1.70 height, and together with Maria, in this meeting about decoloniality, I'll be mediating with her, and we'll talk about this topic. It's a pleasure to meet you all.
Thank you so much, Maria Fernanda, for doing this job with us. So we will have this session, which is a working group presentation. And in order to privilege the debate, we are going to have a 10-minute presentation for each paper, which means that if you have co-authors, you can share the same time in order to have more time for the debate. As we have discussed, it was our goal to promote it. And since we have lots of presentations, then we decided to do so. And we hope that we can go deeper in the topics through the debate that will come right after the presentations from everyone. In case you need, it could be helpful also to enable closed caption. I will just put in a few minutes the guidelines in the chat in order for you to choose automatic closed caption, which can only be used in the language the person is speaking at the moment. But if you think it can be helpful, please do so. We are experimenting with that. I believe it's not even very Zoom doesn't advertise a lot. There's this function, so I think they might be testing it, since we have acknowledged that can be some mistakes in closed caption, but it could be of some help to anyone. So I will just follow the order which is in the program, but in case anyone needs to go to anticipate a presentation or to do their presentation a little bit later than what is in the program, and then you could we can be so flexible with that, and there will be no problem at all. So I'd like then to ask the first person, which is in our list. That's, I'm sorry if I say your name incorrectly. Please apologize in advance, because I probably won't get many names. But the first person, I believe it's Abhishek Vyas. Is this
Abhishek
person?
Vyas.
Yes,
Abhishek.
Abhishek Vyas. Yes. So.
Yes.
Abhishek, we will have 10 minutes, and then I will ask my friend Maria Fernanda to warn you when you reach 8 minutes, so that you can know you still have some more time to close your thoughts. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. I also kept a timer on, so I'll also keep it there.
Okay, just a minute. I'd like to spotlight you so that everybody, I'm sorry. Can you please open your camera? I don't think that people can see you right now.
My camera is on.
Is it? Oh, I'm sorry. I think that's something.
I can see myself in the screen.
I'm sorry. I think I might. I can't see your camera. And does anyone can see Abhishek?
Can you now?
No, I'm sorry.
Strange. Let me just rejoin. That helps.
Yes, I am trying to spotlight back Nena, so she can be available to everyone. Rodrigo, it's possible, yes, to share PowerPoint, no problem. Abshik, are you there? I'm sorry, I can't. Ah, he's coming back. Yeah, he was out and now he's trying to go back. So,
Can you see me now? Yeah, excellent.
I'll just spotlight you. Yeah, great. And spotlight Nani, which, yes, now it's great. Please. So my friend Maria Fernanda will warn you with 8 minutes and we look forward to your presentation, please.
Thank you so much. I'll be sharing my screen. I hope it's visible.
We can't see it full screen, but we can see you sharing yeah, now it's great. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Abhishek Vyas, and I recently finished an MPhil in education from the University of Cambridge, where my focus was on education for peace and nonviolence. And here I am trying to look at the concept of satyagraha, or the massive nonviolent struggle for independence led by Mahatma Gandhi in India, and how that actually can be reimagined as a popular education model for nonviolence. So what I'm trying to do here is looking at a historical movement which motivated millions and millions of Indians and also gave a new method of resistance, which was unprecedented till that point, for resisting unjust colonial rule, for challenging structural inequality, structural injustice, and oppression. And also trying to think of it as a way in which the Eurocentric views of peace education can be dismantled. And especially in the global South, when you talk about peace education or education for peace and nonviolence, it can be driven or it can be derived from cultural elements, from elements that are more contextual to those contexts. So before I get into what Satyagraha could be imagined as, let me briefly talk about what it means. And before going to Satyagraha, let's talk about the idea of nonviolence, because there is a lot of misconception about what nonviolence means. The Hindi or Sanskrit word for nonviolence is ahimsa. Ahimsa is something that Gandhi focused on a lot. That was the root of a satyagraha. It means nonviolence, but it just does not mean non-harm. It does not mean pacifism. It does not mean taking on injustice without any response. It is rooted in two key values, love and courage. Love for the opponent, but not for the injustice. So you may not hate the wrongdoer, but you're still opposing the injustice, you are still opposing the wrong. And in doing so, you are courageous. Now, this is something which is very important that a lot of people miss out on, which is that there can be two forms of nonviolence, nonviolence of the cowardly and nonviolence of the brave. Now, if I have a lot of strength and, if I'm weak and someone has a lot of strength and I choose not to retaliate, then it is my nonviolence because of my weakness, right? If the opponent is way more stronger than I am, then out of compulsion I have to be nonviolent. But regardless of my strength, as a core value, if I'm nonviolent, regardless, even if I am stronger than my opponent, if I choose to treat them with love or compassion. That is the form of nonviolence that Gandhi spoke about. Then what is satyagraha? Satyagraha is made of two words, satya and agra. Satya means truth and agra is adherence. So it means, put together, it means adherence to the truth. So once you have decided what your just cause is, what is the cause that you are fighting for, then you have decided who your opponent is. Then what the satyagrahi, a person who is engaged in satyagraha, tries to do is convert that opponent through love, right? How does, now this is all very philosophical at this point, but there are two broad aspects, two broad things that happen here. First is non-cooperation, which is to say that any sort of oppressive regime, any sort of dictatorial regime cannot function without the cooperation of its constituent participants. If people refuse to obey, refuse to cooperate, then that whatever it is, it has to be dismantled. So it is an active choice to not participate or not cooperate with what you believe is wrong. I will give you an example. And when India was ruled by the British, a lot of raw materials were taken from India for, let's say, cotton, and they were taken to Manchester, and the finished products were sold at extremely high rates to India. So they were exploited, raw materials were bought for extremely cheap cost, and then the finished products were sold at an extremely high rate. And that's how all the cottage industries and everything was dismantled. And what a lot of Indian freedom fighters advocated for was to not buy British products, not buy things which are sold, which are produced in the Britain. So that is non-cooperation with that form of economic exploitation. But that in itself is not sufficient. To not cooperate, to not do something is not enough. There has to be an active way of reimagining what you want after the struggle is over. And that's where the constructive program comes in. So Gandhi advocated for the use of the spinning wheel. He relied a lot on self-reliance, that you should, and there's a concept of Swadeshi. Swadeshi means that buying products which are made in your country, in your region, so that before you help someone else, before you contribute to someone else's economy.
Antes de ayudar con la economía de alguien más, hay que asegurarse de fortalecer la economía propia. Entonces, hablaba de estos dos elementos, la no cooperación y los programas constructivos. Ahora, volviendo al punto de la educación. Gandhi lideró este movimiento, tenía personas de todas las clases económicas, de todas las clases de la sociedad que se unieron a la lucha.
The nuances or the philosophical implications of non-violence, but Gandhi uses certain symbolisms, certain cultural elements that they are aware of. For
Gandhi
example,
utilizó un simbolismo que estaba disponible. Él se basó mucho en las canciones, en las oraciones que las personas escuchaban desde la niñez para evocar la idea de la tolerancia y de la compasión. Lo que hacía era no imponer una idea preestablecida de lo que era la no violencia. En su lugar, identificaba estos elementos de la cultura del país. Y eso le permitió penetrar a la lógica interna de la sociedad. Y siempre las personas hablaban distintas lenguas, ¿no? Si yo puedo hablar de ejemplos del discurso de la cristianidad, de lo que es la compasión, el servicio al otro, eso se conecta muy bien con un tipo de audiencia o de público específico. Entonces Gandhi quería entender quién le hablaba a quién era su público y de esa manera establecer una conversación. Y la belleza de esta forma de resistencia y de movimiento educativo residía
Abhishek, I'm sorry,
en
excuse me, Abhishek.
cuestionar.
Just to let you know that you have 2 minutes left. And also, probably, I'm sorry, I think that there might be an interpreter that has the audio leaking. So please,
Okay.
if you could please check in order for the English speaking room just to hear English. Thank you. I'm so sorry for that. Please, Abhishek, keep going.
Yes. So in conclusion, what I was saying, sorry, before I conclude, this is an important element of challenging the status quo and structural injustice without antagonizing the actors of such injustice. And in an extremely polarizing world today, we we need to engage in dialogue, and we cannot engage in dialogue by othering people. We need to promote an understanding of someone else's context and their own culture. So when we talk about peace education, when we talk about education for peace and nonviolence, it cannot be an externally conceived idea of what is peace and what is nonviolence. It has to be found from that culture. So before entering into such projects or before entering into such programs, it is relevant that you understand what cultural context. Katrina Standish calls it cultural nonviolence, elements of or cultural elements within a culture, within a culture that promote compassion and tolerance. So in India, like in conclusion, I want to sorry, in India, we are currently seeing a huge rise in religious polarization, political polarization, and there is just a refusal to on both ends to come together and enter into a dialogue. And this is where something that has previously worked in the Indian context can be relooked at and reimagined as a way of popular education. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, and I look forward to hearing your comments.
Thank you so much, Abhishek. I'm sorry again to having interrupted you. Well, I'll just call now our next presenter, which will be Gabriela Wieland Macby. Is it correct? Are you there, Gabriela? If you are, please let us know. Are you there? Well, maybe we can come back to Gabriela if she joins us. Is Deborah there? Deborah Firmino? She said she might have some difficulty to connect. So it's probable that she won't be with us today, unfortunately. Well, I think it's Jessica then. Jessica, please, hello, my dear. Yes, you will be the next. I will
Hola.
spotlight you to everyone right
Bueno,
now.
sí, me voy a presentar. Mi nombre es
Yes, I'd
Jessica.
like to introduce myself. I am Jessica Witzolski, and I am a white, curly hair woman. I am currently in Bahía Blanca in Argentina, in Southern America, near to the Argentinian and Patagonia. And I would like to share with you some reflections and perspectives on the Freudian pedagogy and contemporary democracies in order to reflect on the political cultural processes and on the unfinished independences. The idea here is to share our views vis-a-vis the Freudian pedagogical thinking within the same lines of Antonio Gramsci's ideas in order to apply them to Latin America. There have been important ideas in this sphere that have been taken up by Pablo Freire to think the political praxis and the pedagogy needed to this political praxis. We also focus our interest in the latter. We know that the Freudian thinking was complemented by Gramsci's ideas. And we could go back to these ideas to address topics such as the pedagogy of hope of the oppressed and the tools for freedom and liberation as a new approach to a pedagogical praxis that are so needed to counter the hatred narratives, the narratives of intolerance, of fear, or pedagogies based on cruelty, as Rita Segato refers to that to it here in Argentina. And we have seen in the different countries of Latin America how anti-democratic political projects have been gaining importance, and they have imposed difficult realities such as coup d'etats from the United States, and we see now how they are back to what they used to do in the 70s, and they still are doing some soft coup d'etats, lawfare, and that are constantly challenging the democratic systems and go as far as um, persecuting people without pieces of evidence or destitutions or assassinations of characters. And this is all based on the economic policy that is being implemented, which is closely related to all those practices. So we need to have a different perspective, different approach based on the Freudian pedagogy so that we can better reflect on our democracies and on our education and its relation with democracy. We consider that current policies are needed from us, teachers, professors. I'm sorry, the translation, I'm getting the translation. I'm
Excuse me,
going to mute the original
Amaury,
audio. I'm
Amaury,
going to mute
por favor.
original audio.
Entonces
sorry,
decía que
everyone.
la actual arena política es un escenario que nos exige a los pedagogos, como a todos quienes
From
reflexionamos.
all of us in the educational field and those of us who are constantly working in social processes to deploy our efforts to leave aside the visions only related to the academia and to have a greater impact on reality in working with communities. So, considering the current state of things and considering all the attacks by the extreme right, conservative movements, we need to engage and deep transformations. There is a politician in Argentina. He tells us about low intensity citizenship. And we believe that the citizenship of low intensity needs to be countered with the radical democratic projects, as Pablo Freire used to refer to them, the incarceration of indigenous populations in the southern part of Argentina, as well as all the strategies that we have seen, such as lawfare, will compel us to reflect on all this and to make progress in recognizing that this is a history based in the dictatorships that we have had in Latin America. But also, we need to remind that capitalism also has played an important role, such as well as colonialism, patriarchy, and all the genocides that have been committed against the populations of our countries when back in the times of the colonization. This intersectional approach based on decolonization projects, as Lilia Rivera Hostikansky says, we cannot talk about decolonization without decolonizing political projects. These are possibilities that we can explore. Paulo Freire also said that his pedagogical proposal had the purpose of making a democratic proposal, and he defined it as a radically democratic proposal. He doesn't want to deal with the
en 1989.
democracy as it is
al
understood
servicio
by
del
the
pueblo boliviano,
bourgeoisie. And he
organismo
said
del
this in an
socialismo
interview
democrático.
in 89 when he took the floor in a
Dice,
human
dice,
rights
no se
organization.
satisface
He
con la
said that,
socialdemocracia, decía
well,
Paulo
uh,
Freire.
Paulo
De
Freire
este
said
modo,
that the
la
bourgeois
proclama una
democracy
democracia
has
radical,
nothing to do with social
radical
democracy.
es
And he
alta
proposes a radical
la educación popular.
approach. And that is precisely what popular education is about.
Por ello también la exigencia
So
proyecto
this
radical,
explains
una
also that
mudanza de la
as a
trayectoria de la
radical
historia
project,
que hoy se encuentran
the fact
relegados
that
a
we
objetos de la
need
historia de otros, de
to
Paulo Freire.
change radically the way in which we
Obviamente, decía
understand
él en esa
history.
entrevista,
And he said in that
ninguna nueva
interview
sociedad de
that
clases podría
there
copiar
is
la
no
propuesta
class
radical y
society that
democrática que
could
hicimos
adopt a
poner en marcha,
radical
pues
democratic
ninguna clase
proposal
dominante se animaría a
because
emplearla a nivel
there will,
territorial.
I'm sure that
¿Cómo
no
así?
dominant classes
Permiso,
will
Solo
dare
Jessica.
to
podríamos
apply it.
Permiso, tienes dos
Only
más
a very
minutos.
bold,
Dale.
pondría en
bold
práctica una educación que
uh,
pueda formar sujetos
Permiso,
críticos.
Jessica. Tienes dos más minutos.
Entonces, llevar adelante una educación para la libertad no es tarea de quien domina.
education for freedom is not the task of those who are dominating us. This is what Pablo Freire used to say in 1989 here in
Esta
Argentina.
tarea es exclusiva de la
This is a
autoridad de los
task that needs
dominados,
to be
decía.
taken up by
Saber
those who are
cómo
dominated,
educación
to know
constituye
how
siempre un
and
problema a resolver en cada
how
sociedad,
to
en cada
drive
momento.
this type of education is always a problem of all
En este
societies and in
sentido,
different
nosotros
developments in history.
entendemos
We
que los
understand in this
avances de
regard
este proyecto
that the advances
fascista
made and the anti-democratic projects that we just
por
mentioned,
un lado a nivel
on the
económico,
one hand,
financiero,
there were,
a nivel
for instance,
político, golpes
uh,
blandos,
economic
estrategias
doctrines,
comerciales
soft coup
inmediatas,
d'etats,
intentos de matar
specific media
noticias, persecuciones,
strategies, assassination of a
proscripciones,
president, prescriptions,
así como desde lo
as
cultural el
well as
fascismo.
from the cultural standpoint, fascism. Sorry, she has some connection problems.
Acho que I think
Yes,
that
her image is
Jessica
frozen.
has a problem with the connection.
Sociedades que llaman a asesinar a los
wait,
pueblos originales
Jessica?
descendientes.
Jessica, you have disconnected. We couldn't hear you for the last
¿Se me
8
escucha?
seconds. Now
¿Se me
we can
escucha?
hear. Yes.
Bueno, acá
Very
estoy.
well, here I am.
Estable internet.
Yes, I have some problems with my internet connection. Sorry about that.
Bueno, lo que mencionaba es que
As I
a
was
nivel
saying, is
cultural
that from the
y
cultural
social,
standpoint and social
el
standpoint,
fascismo y
fascism
el armado de causas, allanamientos
and
de grupos fascistas se están dando,
aggressions by the
que llaman a
fascist
asesinar, por
groups,
ejemplo, a los pueblos
such as
originarios,
rails, are constantly
del país.
threatening the
Así nosotros
indigenous
pensamos
populations here in Argentina. And we also
que una educación
think that
como práctica de la libertad
an
requiere
education as a practice
de
towards freedom
desandar los
requires to
colonizadores
dismantle the
cultural
colonization projects from the social cultural
así
standpoint.
reconocer nuestra
And we
historia,
also need
¿no?
to recognize our history.
Reconocer
We
los
need
primeros
to
genocidios, como mencionaba,
acknowledge that
así como
there were
las
crimes committed
dictaduras
against
recientes en el
humanity, as we said,
continente.
as well as the existence of recent dictatorships in our continent.
Paulo Freire,
Paulo
nosotros sabe,
Freire
seguimos planteando desde la
said,
corriente
and we
educación
believe
popular,
this from our
que
popular
es necesaria una
education
reinvención de la
movement, that
sociedad a
we need
partir
to give a new dimension to our society
de categorías
from
descoloniales, ¿no?
decolonized categories.
Y él decía, soy
And he said,
calmamente optimista del
I
presente
am
y estoy
hopeful
ansiosamente seguro del
vis-a-vis the
futuro de
present,
nuestra América.
and I am sure of the future of our America.
Excuse me, Jessica.
So we believe that it is
We
of
have
the
run out of
essence
time.
to
Could you please
responsibly reflect on
conclude?
our insufficient democracies and also how to move forward towards processes that will acknowledge
y patriarcado. Así,
Excuse me, Jessica, permiso.
queremos compartir un video de una situación
Perdón.
que se está atravesando actualmente en Argentina y que no es más que un botón de muestra de estos procesos que estamos atravesando y que es necesario revertir para poder avanzar en democracias radicales.
Perdón, permiso, Jessica.
Siguiendo a
sorry.
Paulo Freire en aquella entrevista del año 89 en nuestro país.
Jessica, I'm sorry.
Así que, Mayra, si podemos compartir el video, que
Lo pido, por favor, Jessica, que pueda compartir
se
un
trata de una
enlace,
represión
porque
que se
no
dio
podemos, estamos en
hace
el
2
tiempo. se
semanas
pasan 10
acá en
minutos.
Argentina, en territorios de pueblos originarios, en las que fueron desalojados
Permiso, permiso,
con un
Jessica,
armado
¿me
de
escuchas?
causas de supuestos incendios, en territorio mapuche, en la zona de Bariloche, Argentina,
Jessica, ¿me escuchas?
que es una de las zonas más
Jessica,
hermosas de Sudamérica.
permiso,
Son
Jessica.
comunidades de pueblo originario mapuche, preexistente a los estados-nación argentino-chileno.
Jessica, pasamos los
Que
10
están
minutos.
atravesando un proceso de recuperación territorial.
Jessica,
Varias mujeres fueron encarceladas, aún hay 3 encarceladas, entre ellas 2 con niños y una machi, una autoridad ancestral. Si podemos compartir el video.
Jessica, ¿me escucha? ¿Me escuchas? No, ¿puedes por favor compartir el enlace del video? Porque pasamos ya más de 10 minutos y tenemos otras presentaciones. Y nos gustaría muchísimo ver su video.
Ah, bueno.
Por favor. Disculpa, estamos con poco tiempo para tantas presentaciones
Sí,
tan
no, lo
importantes.
subimos, tranquila.
Por favor,
No hay
comparte
problema.
con nosotros.
No hay
Dale.
problema. Subimos un link.
Link. Of course, I will share the link.
Well, thank you, Jessica, for your understanding.
A ustedes.
We have some problem with the translation in Portuguese. I'll just have to have it settled because it's affecting the sign language interpretation. Estou falando na sala de áudio original. Por favor, todos os intérpretes que estão traduzindo para o português, verifiquem as cabines se estão corretas, porque está acontecendo interferência de cabines e as intérpretes de Libras estão com dificuldades. Então, é muito novo para a gente, peço desculpas por qualquer inconveniente, mas para que a gente consiga que todas as pessoas acompanhem. Então, vou voltar para o inglês.
Maíra, é o Marcelo. Sim,
por
tudo
favor.
bem?
Tudo
então,
bem?
acho que também vai ser necessário você me colocar como intérprete para eu poder revezar com a Raquel, porque a outra intérprete, Fernanda, teve problema no computador, tá? Então, quando você for quando você for reativar o sistema ou reiniciar, aí talvez isso consiga ser resolvido também, né?
Tá bem, muito obrigada, Marcelo.
Claro.
Vou fazer isso agora. Inglês, espanhol, inglês, português?
Eu vou ficar no inglês-português, junto com a Raquel.
Ok. E a Raquel já está aqui?
Ela estava fazendo, né? Ela não está?
Eu não sei se ela está aqui. Eu te adicionei. Well, I'm sorry, everyone. We are a little bit trying to set it up, but I hope to the end of today, we'll have it set. So it's back, Nani. I'm sorry for the trouble. And we will be back to our order of presentation. Please, Jessica, bring back these thoughts for our debate. That should be great. Now I'd like to call Rebecca Noemi de Oliveira Bezerra. Are you there, Rebecca? If you are, please. Rebecca.
Oh, yes, yes. I
Are
am here.
you? Are you? Oh, great. I can't find you here, Rebecca de Oliveira. Just let me spotlight you so that you can present. I can only find Rebecca the interpreter. I can't find Rebecca Oliveira. Rebecca, do you have your camera on? Rebecca, maybe she's not here right now.
Oi. Oi.
Are you? Oi. Can you please open your camera, Rebecca? I can't see you right now, so that I can spotlight you. Are you there, Rebecca? Rebecca Noemi de Oliveira Bezerra, not Rebecca, our interpreter. Are you there? Well, I think that Rebecca, not our interpreter, which is doing a great job. Thank you, Rebecca. But I'll call then our next on the list. That's Rodrigo Barbosa Ribeiro. Rodrigo, are you there? Yes, I can see you. I'll spotlight you. So
Thank you.
You can choose whichever language you'd like to present it to.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation, for having me to accept my work here. I'm Brazilian. I'm a bald man with glass and wearing a gray t-shirt, and I have a white background. I will share my presentation. One moment. Let me find here and see. I hope that you can. Let me see. I hope you are seeing my. Yes, I can see it now. Well, I will present to you a little part of my present work. I'm in Cambridge, in Center of Latin American Studies of the University of Cambridge. I'm teacher at Federal University of São Paulo in Brazil. And now I'm studying for the few years ago, the racism against indigenous people. And here I will focus on the challenges related to the school education. For start our conversation or talk, it's important to underline that only after 1988 Brazilian Constitution, the indigenous people had the right to be educated as they are way of life, are their traditions, their beliefs, especially their language. Before this constitution, we only had missionary actions before in the colonial time, in the imperial time of Brazil, and even in the beginning of the 20th century. And in the beginning of the last century, in the 20th century, we have a Republican inside try to construction a different approach to education of indigenous people, but still it was a way of bringing them to the national community, how they say in the Brazilian laws. So it's a relatively recent mark that we can underline, that can stress that we are trying to figure out a different approach to indigenous education. And I bring this image, very new in the indigenous movement, at least, that shows Ailton Krenak in the Congress, in the Brazilian Congress in 1986, if I'm not mistaken, 1985. this when the constitution were being constructed after in the end of the Brazilian military dictatorship. And in his act of, you can see wearing a white shoe, a white costume, and because it was mandatory to speak with the Congress people with this kind of dress, and he painted his face in black as a way of protest with this racist institutional approach to the indigenous traditions. And that actually, together with all other institutions and movements created by the end of the 1970s years, allowed the indigenous people to construct this changement in the Brazilian constitutional law. I only bring it here to see the institutional framework, but especially for our intention here, I would underline the Article 210 and the second paragraph. He addressed the following statement: regular elementary school will be taught in Portuguese, ensuring that indigenous community are also able to use their mother language in their own learning process. So, what happened next? After the Brazilian election, first Brazilian election in 1989, and especially after the reorganization of ministerial of education, but other services also, they start to implement some changements on the way that indigenous were taught in the schools, in the Brazilian schools in special. Since the 1990s years, the Ministry of Education established a national indigenous education policy. The indigenous people's demands and proposals have begun to be recognized in Brazil. This policy was conceived as a kind of educational based on principles such as bilingualism, specificity, and interculturality. In these principles aim, among other things, to guarantee the physical, linguistic, and cultural survival of indigenous people, to support their exercise of rights, and to make it possible for them to communicate and interact with other ethnic, racial, and social groups. Well, the challenges were immense, and one of the things that happening after that changement in the Brazilian law, in the Brazilian institutions, was the racism in indigenous against indigenous people. I can't say that it wasn't racism before that time, that age, at least we can say it. But at least after that, we can start to pay attention on that phenomenon. And I would call the attention here, especially about the reports on violence against indigenous people. It's a series of publications issued by CIMI, a missionary indigenous council. It's a ONG linked to the National Conference of Bishops of Catholic Church in Brazil. But they work a little bit different. They are created in 1972 as a way of support the indigenous struggle in the indigenous fight against oppression, and to try to create, and it was especially CIMI support that allowed the indigenous movement to organize itself in the beginning of 1980 years. Well, Since 2003, these reports have a special session dedicated to denounce, to organize the racism against indigenous people. These reports, the last one was issued in this year, related to episodes that happened in 2021.
Excuse me, Rodrigo, just to let you know, you have 2 more minutes. I'm sorry to interrupt.
The report showed 324 episodes of racism in all states, in almost all states, and in especially the racism in school environmental. It was particularly notable because it was that so much cases. It was only 66 cases, but it happened in every year in every school levels. Here I show the numbers in primary, secondary, and university. I only want to note that some cases it was impossible to realize if the school was which school level was the school, or precisely if the school if the case occurred among some indigenous that was in secondary or primary school, because some establishments in Brazil offered the 2 degrees simultaneously. To finish our talk, I have a lot of more information that could be addressed in the comment session later. I would like only to show very quickly who committed these acts, and to be 3, where it happened and who and where it happened. Only this, I think it will be enough. Well, the most part of acts were committed by teachers, and 9 of 22 of the cases in elementary schools were made by teachers, and 5 of 22 of the cases in secondary schools were made by teachers, and a minor part in the superior, in the universities and colleges, but there's a different situation that we could speak later. Also, we have almost a third of the the cases were done by students, but also other bureaucratic staffs, especially in the school environmental, but also in the superior instances like states cabinets or educational ministry, even in the different government that we have since the beginning of this century. And most importantly,
Rodrigo, I'm so sorry to tell you, we've reached 10 minutes. Sorry, if you could.
Okay, only to finish and to show this image, it's just to say that it's happening also in all schools, in our organization levels in Brazil, in the cities, in the schools, in the federal also. And to federal, it's important to note that almost 100% happening in universities, in college, especially since the year 2015. Well, and to finish, and hoping that we could speak later, I only would like to underline that this occurrence were not an isolated case, but this scenario can help us to understand how the racism is a way to keep the difference and the hierarchy among other class and ethnic groups in Brazil. Only that. Sorry for any problem in my pronunciation and the conduction of this, and I thank you very much for the attending here.
Thank you so much for your important presentation, Rodrigo, for bringing this such an important subject to our debate. And I hope we can go deeper into that discussion right away. And I'm sorry if we had any trouble during the interpretation. Hope that we are getting to understand each other. Right now, I'd like to call Sanja Petkovska. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it. Sanja, are you there? Marcelo, do you need me to? We need to set up the cabin. We had probably a little problem. I'll go to the original audio in order to set it up. And in case Sanja is not there, I'll be calling right away Sylvia. Sylvia, are you there? I'll just spotlight you, and just I'll please ask for your patience a little bit so that everyone can follow up, because we are having a small problem in translation. We're going to set it up and then I'll give you the floor. Just a moment.
Okay.
Okay. Marcelo, vamos acertar a cabine. Está aí, eu estou no áudio original, Marcelo. Se puder, tá aqui para a gente acertar a cabine. Eu vou tirar o Marcelo da cabine para que a gente acerte aqui. Só um minutinho e pronto. Marcelo?
Pronto, estou aqui agora. Você pode me ouvir bem, né?
Sim, sim.
Então, vamos lá. É importante que eu saiba, para eu poder te ajudar, né? Saber quais cabines que você montou.
Certo, vamos lá. Estamos na cabine. Andreina, English, Spanish.
Isso, tem mais alguém com ela?
Tem, eu vou falar todos. Andreina, English, Spanish. Mazil, português, English. Amauri, Spanish, português.
Então, vamos pouco a pouco. Peraí, não precisa falar todo mundo para a gente poder se organizar. Na de português e inglês, estamos eu e a Raquel. Estou ajudando a Raquel Mazil, que é a Mazil.
Sim.
É que ela botou Mazil, é o nome dela. Eu falei Raquel, desculpa. É porque Raquel Mazil, tá? Então, Raquel e Mazil são a mesma pessoa. Então, estou na cabine com ela, tá? Muito bem. Eu estou acertando aqui com você em português, mas a Andreina não entende português. Então, depois que a gente acertar tudo, você não me coloca na cabine ainda não, porque eu vou ter que falar aqui em inglês para a Andreina, tá? Então, tá.
Everyone, I'm so sorry. We're just discussing in Portuguese the cabin in order to set it up. Please ask for a little bit of your patience, because we're...
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's going to be.
It's not cabin, it's booth. The booth. Cabine em inglês é booth, Maíra. Só para te ajudar. Quando você fala cabin, as pessoas não vão entender. We are in the booth, okay? We are trying to set up the booth here, okay? Right.
So please, a little minute of your patience.
Yeah,
so that no
just a minute,
leaks.
Sylvia. Yes, okay. And then it's the Spanish booth. It's Amauri and Gabriela.
Amauri, Gabriela e Cláudia. Temos três.
And Cláudia. Cláudia, what languages do you speak, Cláudia?
Cláudia, can you hear us?
Cláudia.
Cláudia. I'll just...
No, yeah.
No, I'll take off Claudia, and if she comes
maybe
back,
Claudia's not here right now because he's doing the pause. I'm doing the interpretation from English to Spanish, so
yeah.
But he's doing English Spanish.
Who is speaking? Andreina?
Andreina, yes. Hi.
Okay, so Claudia is helping you with your interpretation.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So because we have to organize this, okay?
Okay, so Claudia Spanish English together with Andreina, and Spanish Portuguese Gabriela and Amauri.
Yes, and English Portuguese Marcelo and Raquel.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, but now we have to organize this so that we don't have a conflict. All right.
Okay.
So
yes, I just wanted to add that I don't know if Mayra knows that, but you can speak in the main audio and you can hear in any booth. right? You don't have to
Okay.
change booth to speak in any audio. You can speak in the main. I mean,
Okay.
the booth
Okay,
is
Adriana,
only.
can we please come back? I'm so sorry. I'm so
Yeah, no,
these
Adriana,
people-
I'm sorry. She removed everybody from the booth so
Yes.
that I can talk with Maíra.
Yes.
And then we are going to organize everything because some people are speaking the same language, different interpreters. So I'm going to organize this. Tell me, Maíra.
Can we go back right now, Marcelo, or do we need to do any setting up?
Yeah, I
yet?
need just to set up this, okay?
Okay.
So for instance, okay. Now Sylvia is going to speak in which language?
In English.
In English? Okay, in English. Okay, so now when Sylvia speaks in English, Marcelo and Raquel will speak in Portuguese, will translate into Portuguese, ok? Então, para o pessoal de Libras, vocês vão ter que entrar no canal de português para escutar o Marcelo ou a Raquel, tá? Ok. Now that Sylvia is going to speak in English, Andreina and Claudia will translate into Spanish.
Yes.
Okay, Spanish. So now, Amaury and Gabriela don't need to work now.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much for organizing that, Marcelo. Thank you for your patience, everyone. Obrigada pela paciência, todo mundo. Gracias por la paciencia. Estamos intentando que todos puedan comprender. We're trying everyone to
And then one more point. When somebody speaks into Portuguese, and then Andreina and Claudia don't work, they stop, because Amaury and Gabriela will translate into Spanish. And Marcela and Raquel will translate into English. That's the perfect combination. But please, I will write this in the group that we have, so we will be organized. Now, please, let's return. Thank you, Maíra. Thank you, Sylvia, for your patience. But it's very important because it's popular education. So we need to include more people to understand the interpreting, okay?
Yes,
so that is it.
So much,
thank
Marcelo.
you for your patience.
Thank you,
I'm sorry,
everyone.
but you have to open the booth again because now we are off the booth.
Yes, Gandrina, she will start the booth again. Be patience, please.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, so I'll just start it right now. And we are back to our previous program after doing some quite nice translating popular education class that Marcelo gave us all. Thank you, Marcelo, for that. I'm sorry.
Muito obrigada.
Well, then we move to Sylvia Espinal, which has been very patient. Thank you so much. Please, Sylvia, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Maíra, and the others for helping us in translation. And I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So, well, I am Silvia Espinal Mesa. I am Peruvian. I am a brown woman who is wearing now a sky blue t-shirt with a white background. So, hola a todos, soy Silvia, soy peruana. Yo hablo español como primera lengua, es mi lengua, pero ahora estoy haciendo un doctorado en educación en la Universidad de Bristol en UK. So,
hi everyone, I'm Silvia, I'm Peruvian.
Speaking in English because I'm doing my PhD in education at the University of Bristol in the UK. Well, this is my doctoral thesis. I mean, for this presentation, the title is Intercultural Pedagogies of Social Justice from the Voices of Rural Teachers in Peru. So the outline, it's as follows. Let me check. Well, I will talk about briefly about contextualization, research questions, my theoretical framework, some quotations from that, methodology, and the first findings from my fieldwork. And then, of course, the question and collective feedback that can emerge from this room. Well, a bit about the contextualization. Oh, let me put on full screen. Okay, so my study is situated within the neoliberal policies. I said that these neoliberal policies have been created disparities. In my country, these disparities are huge. So it implies that disadvantaged children attain, for example, the poorest performance in educational assessments. There are inequalities associated with poverty, well, lack of quality education, and racism, with very strong in Peru. So being aware of this unequal context, when I started my PhD, I was wondering about how about these different pedagogies who are, working, that many teachers are applying, working with Freire and other critical educators. And I was wondering about the practice of social justice in education from the voices of these rural teachers. So I decided to focus on rural teachers because I noticed that their voices were not sufficiently heard, in the official channels. So as you know, I think the previous presentations have mentioned, this idea of that the neoliberal model, tried to be, and it's, it's the tenor of the neoliberal policies is to silence, the critical voices. So, and if I am, focused on social justice, so I found this quotation from Chipting and Portelli that I found very interesting to discuss how, this neoliberal model, does not base its actions on robust conceptualizations of equality and social justice. So they don't have an explicit link to critical consensualist dialogue on oppressive conditions. So for me, that was the point of departure, to have my research topic and to be and to reflect about the oppressive conditions that are present in rural contexts in Peru, and how the critical voices from rural teachers have been, as I mentioned before, historically silenced by these official channels. So my research questions briefly are talking about how this group of school teachers in rural Peru conceptualize and practice their commitment to social justice throughout these critical pedagogies. I am interested in knowing the way of implementation. How do they implement critical pedagogies throughout their practices as rural teachers? And in what ways this practice of social justice from this group of teachers run into tension with this neoliberal landscape? Because I am interested in, having this discussion between these two levels, as community levels, which is important, to research. And how about the, these macro structures, about the neoliberal policies? And, just briefly, because we don't have time to expand, but maybe then later in the discussion. Well, my theoretical framework lies on critical pedagogies, of course, and I am using these 4 key authors that you know very well, obviously Paulo Freire, Henry Giroux, Peter McLaren, and Antonia Darder, for example. And the 4 of them are talking about, the school as a site or a space of domination and liberation at the same time. So the importance of looking at the social circumstances that are crucial to the formation of critical consensualists, within the school and beyond school. And the important role of teachers, as you know, as transformative intellectuals, not only as technicians, as part of this neoliberal structures, but also, to go beyond as critical educators, right? Well, I am using this methodology, which I found very useful, the narrative inquiry, to go in depth, into human experiences where individuals use the stories to mobilize and do political work. So my methodology, it's have the purpose to interview 8 rural teachers, to see how these voices are manifesting, are how their pedagogical practices are linked to critical pedagogy in classrooms. So, and for that, I am using, I am focusing on two regions in Peru, my country.
Excuse me, Sylvia, if you could please talk a little slower for us to keep up. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sorry, because I was worried about the time, to say, okay. Well, the study is focused on in two regions in Peru, two rural regions, Cusco and Ayacucho. You can see the location in this map. And well, about the research instruments, I use in-depth interviews as well as walk-in interviews that I found very useful, to have these conversations with rural teachers. I finished the fieldwork just recently, a month ago in Peru, in these two regions. And well, about the teachers selected, well, I decided to collect 8 stories from 8 rural teachers, Peruvian teachers, that had, or actually they have, experience of working in critical pedagogies. So they are working as primary teachers or secondary teachers. For example, one of them is working on arts and education, and the others in social sciences. The important thing to emphasize in this chart is that I have 5 of 8 of these teachers are speaking Quechua as a mother tongue, which is important, when we are talking about critical pedagogies. And I will be saying a little, saying a bit more about this variable, the Quechua and the cultural pedagogies in their discourses. So I am in the third year, in the PhD. So in this moment, I am focusing on transcribing, and after the data collection, I am focusing on analyzing the data and checking how these discourses are emerging and what are the commonalities and the difference among these discourses. So I found this. I try to to build and to make this graph to discuss a bit about these important variables that emerge from their discourses, from their narratives. So I found that critical approaches are part of their teacher experiences. Most of them are intercultural teachers. It means that they are working in Quechua and Spanish in this bilingual model, the intercultural bilingual education in Peru. And
Sylvia, I'm sorry again, 2 minutes more.
Okay, that's good. And they are using Quechua, the language, in Peru, one of the native languages in Peru, and local language to promote, the crop calendar, to promote songs and poems. And then they are doing this critical interculturality in education, which is important, but at the same time, they are not questioning the neoliberal education. They are saying that they value the two cultures, the Western culture, the Western knowledge, and the native knowledge at the same level, which is interesting. And they are doing these pedagogical practices, through how art, education, and collaborative activities. I mean, it allows, to say that social justice in education, from this first very, very, very early draft of my analysis, that the social justice in education are promoting changes within their communities, and the teachers are trying to reappraise the native language as well as their culture, and to be, to respect and to put the two cultures, the Western culture, call it the Western culture, and the native culture at the same level. And well, thank you very much for listening to me. And well, I appreciate your questions and collective feedback. Thank you. I'm sorry for being a bit fast at the beginning. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Sylvia. I'm sorry for interrupting you, and thank you for all your patience with our setting up. I'm not sure if we had the other authors, which I called later, or which I called earlier, so I'll just call them again. Is Gabriela Wieland Matby there? No? Is Deborah Firmino there? No? Is Rebeca Noemi de Oliveira Bezerra there? Also, no, not there. And Sanja Petkovska, are you there? Well, that leaves us to the debate right now. So I'll just we'll just pass to that. And we've had some questions in the chat, and also Maria Fernanda is sharing the attendance list, which we kindly ask everyone to fill it in, especially those who presented, because that's where we're doing the certificates for presentation and participation of this session. So, Maria Fernanda, would you please share the thoughts and comments from the chat with us in order to start and to get warm, so that people want to raise up their hands or to put your name into the chat? You're please very welcome to share comments, thoughts, and questions on the presentation. Please, Maria Fernanda.
Então, vamos lá. Primeiro, agradecer imensamente por todas as apresentações que tivemos até aqui e convidar, né, reforçar o convite para que vocês participem com a gente no chat, para a gente ter uma boa discussão. Até agora, a gente recebeu...
Maria Fernanda, are you speaking in which cabin? If you are in Portuguese cabin, please. Or would the interpreter please check, because in English we are hearing you in Portuguese.
Okay. See if that's right now. Vou falar em português.
Yes, please say in Portuguese if you're in the Portuguese booth. I'm sorry, I said cabin again.
Então,
okay.
Então vamos lá, vou repetir. Agradecer a todo mundo pela apresentação, pelas apresentações ricas que a gente teve aqui nessa tarde, e convidar todas e todos para que participem, né, do nosso chat, tragam aqui as perguntas, as intervenções de vocês. E aí vou começar trazendo, então, uma primeira pergunta, na verdade, a única pergunta que a gente teve até aqui,
Now we'll
né?
bring the first question that we had.
Dirige a apresentação do Abhishek.
It's
É uma
for
pergunta feita pelo
Abhishek's
Rodrigo
presentation.
Ribeiro. Eu vou passar a palavra para que o Rodrigo faça a sua pergunta e para que o Abhishek possa respondê-la.
And I am going to give him
Abhishek
the
can
floor
answer
so
the
that he
question.
could ask the question.
He starts actually to answer the question in the comments, but the question is, because we have such a divisive words today, especially I'm aiming our presidential election in Brazil. So I would like to hear a little bit more how to construct a non-violence program towards this kind of divisive and internal opponent, especially when this opponent use the hate speech as a political weapon, as a way of constructing his program, his political behavior, his agenda, to be in short terms. So he starts to answer me in the conversation, but I would like to hear him himself to a little bit more about it. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for your question, and that's a very timely question, and not just for Brazil, but even the part of the world that I come from. In India, you have so much divisiveness on the lines of religion, on the lines of political ideology, and you have seen these kind of regimes in the UK, in the US, and I think dialogue is what we need to focus on. That what has happened, in my opinion, is there are echo chambers created where we only talk to people who hold similar views or who hold the same ideologies that we do, and that helps no one. If we are to talk about nonviolence, then it means that even at the cost of our own suffering, we are willing to engage in dialogue with people who don't hold the same views. And in doing so, as I wrote in the comment, what we're doing is we are appealing to the reason, but more than that, nonviolence appeals more to emotions and conscience. And also it creates an imbalance where you have one side which is being brutal, which is being hateful, and other side which has the option of retaliating with the same violence, chooses not to do that. And that creates what it's called, like that imbalance creates more support in favor of the non-violent actor. So how do you not lose compassion? How do you not end up doing what they are doing to you? At the same time, thinking of what alternative do we want to propose? Because too often, I think in resistance movements and in opposition, we are too much focused on what we do not want, that we do not emphasize much on what we actually want. So if I could give the example of the Indian freedom struggle, Gandhi's focus was not to just get rid of the colonial rulers. That was one part of it. But he did not want to replace white oppressors with brown oppressors, right? He did want to structurally reform the way India was divided in terms of religion, caste, economics. So I think that kind of dialogue has to be initiated. It can no longer be us versus them. It's not that they are wrong and we are right, or that they are completely wrong and we are completely right. That nonviolence requires constant introspection about your own positionality, and to be critical of your own shortcomings as well. So that idea of antagonism is taken away from it. I might have answered it in a more roundabout manner, but what I'm trying to say is, it's to create a culture through education, and education is not just formal education in schools, but also the education that happens through mass media, through other forms of informal and non-formal education. How do we focus on those aspects? Every time we see that violence is emphasized on, you are taught a lot of ways to be violent, but you actually aren't taught the ways to be non-violent, right? And it's interesting because violence is made attractive. As kids, we are given toys which are like guns, or the idea of masculinity, the idea of heroism is someone who can beat up people, who can has the ability to destroy. So those kind of things need to be changed, and then we have the skills to oppose such regimes. So I'm sorry, I'm still not able to give you a satisfactory answer, but these are my thoughts on what you said.
Thank you, Abhishek. That's very important points for many contexts right now, right? And I'll also invite everyone to share your thoughts and comments and questions in the chat. And I've just suggested to Jessica that she might present the video if everyone agrees with that, because our main concern was that everybody had the time to present, and we actually did it, because unfortunately we had some absence. And now I put Jessica in the spotlight, and I'll just just share.
Aquí estoy. Si podemos proyectar el video.
Yes, if we could play the video, Myra.
Yes.
I just shared it.
Yes. Jessica, just to let everybody know that this video is in Spanish, okay? It's a 2-minute video in Spanish. just a minute while I set it up, and while I do, anyone is welcome to make your comments. Okay, I'll just be opening.
Lo hizo un colectivo de comunicación
This
popular.
video was made by a collective of popular education in Argentina named El Pataco.
un espíritu de trabajo, como lo es el rol de Machi. Y los Wincas saben qué tan importante es para nosotros.
The Wikinkas nation knows how important our traditions are to us. Are we going to question our ancestors? Are we invaders? No, we are people who are resisting. The political class is getting hold of our land, and they have snatched our lands. And the true enemies of our nations, of our peoples, are others. Here we are facing all the company interests. I'm sorry, the sound is too poor to allow for an interpretation.
Tan nadie, que cuesta un montón decir que hoy soy mapuche. Pero a todos esos pulamuen que estén escuchando, tenemos que manifestar, tenemos que apoyar a nuestra Lamuen Machi, tenemos que repudiar esta situación y a todas las organizaciones sociales, porque esto es un acto de alegislamiento y a entender que a nosotros no nos interesa ninguna especulación inmobiliaria, no nos interesa vender el territorio, no nos interesa vender la madera, no nos interesa siquiera el turismo, nos interesa ser mapuche en nuestros territorios, practicar nuestra espiritualidad, tener nuestra Lamuen Machi, y por Rafael Nahuel, por Elías Calicol Galayem, incluso por Santiago Maldonado, no nos van a detener.
We are not going to stop fighting. Well, in spite of the sound problems that didn't allow for an accurate translation, you could see some images of the territories that are under threat. The map showed 7 hectares of territories that they are fighting for. And they have been the Lewis and Wharton, which are English companies. There are also interests from the Dutch monarchy, and they are seizing the lands in spite of the Aboriginal people's interests. And you can see that there were women who were detained. So it is important for us to get together and to fight against racism, patriarchy, and capitalism in order to defend our territories.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for bringing such an important question and urgent, because people are arrested, people are threatened right now, and we definitely should show them support and bring a lot of bring this issue to discussion. So thank you so much for that, Jessica. And we have everyone is welcome to share their thoughts and comments. And in case someone's shy, I like to, oh, please, Maria, oh, Maria Fernanda, just go ahead and make your question.
Now I'm wondering if I'm in the right booth. Eu vou falar em português.
You should talk the language that's written, the word symbol that you chose. Whichever is the language, you just go ahead and speak in that language, okay?
Tá bom, entrei na cabine português e vou falar em português.
Okay, I'll speak English. I'd like to pose a question to Rodrigo.
I wanted to ask us.
I can hear the translation to Spanish, so
go
it's
back to
disturbing me.
Rodrigo's question.
Well, the question is, Rodrigo, I work with indigenous education here in São Paulo, and these days we have around 45 indigenous schools in our state, and we see that there is a kind of
and we have realized
setting, a
that they
kind
are
of
getting organized,
situation,
and there is an increase in organization actually
articulated by
state,
the institutions responsible for indigenous education. We don't have
this, and they have
we don't have policies on indigenous education. So
I am
when
very
you
interested in
mention
topic,
the
especially
data
when
about detection of racism against indigenous people at school and university,
available data,
I think it's very serious because you told us that most of those cases involve teachers and professors.
Taken very
so I'd like to share with you something that's very makes me think a lot. When we take into consideration São Paulo, although we've been thinking more and more about the education, ethnic and racial,
and education also.
We see that
but unfortunately, there
we
has
don't
not been a
see
reduction of racism cases
any movement,
and one of the problems that I have
movement
seen is
in
that we
decreasing
need to
these
identify
cases
these
of
spaces.
racism in
And I'm
school
wondering if there
and
is a system
university,
where
although we've been progressing a lot in
schools,
discussions about
pedagogical
race and racism.
coordinators and directors could
Therefore, we don't
register
have
some cases of
racism
conflicts, but
as a
unfortunately,
category
don't use the word racism still.
to
And this is
label
the reason why there
students
are
who commit
conflicts among
racism
students.
against their peers.
Sometimes they say that they have
Usually they
behavior
are
problems, but they do not
treated
acknowledge that
as
this is
students who are
racism.
problematic but not
So when you
racists.
talked about your
I'd
work,
like to know
what are the
your opinion about
cases
what cases
that
could be
you could
considered
say are related
racism
to
and
racism?
which
Well,
cases are
which cases
racism but are not
classified
still
as
labeled as
issues and which
racism?
aren't? And when using this terminology, how do you go about it?
But I'm sorry, we couldn't understand you well. We had a double translation in English, and
okay.
I'm
it's
so
better
sorry.
I speak Portuguese or any.
I'm sorry, if you do speak Portuguese, would you please
okay, eu falo.
choose the word and put it in Portuguese, please? Thank you. I'm sorry for that.
Okay, let me see. Eu coloquei em português agora, e aí vai haver tradução. Então, nesse caso, fica mais fácil. Para mim, não tem problema. Bom, Maíra, obrigado pela questão. Na verdade, eu sou uma das pessoas que está fazendo parte dessa iniciativa do FAPISP, de tentar construir, eu e outros, tem um coletivo de professores das universidades públicas de São Paulo. Não quero puxar nada para minha brasa, não é nada
We
disso.
have a collective of researcher professors at university who are addressing those issues because we have during the 1980s, 1988, since then, we have a discussion of policies addressing racial issues, but still things have not improved in relation to the indigenous cause. And we have policies that are not working well. And I think the worst situation is the training of teachers. First of all, the training of indigenous teachers, because mainly about language, because we need to talk about this issue that concerns university and indigenous practices, because those two words need to connect and to talk to get to an agreement. When we had the reform of our policies and we started thinking about Africa in our curriculum, our curriculum at university have not addressed well those issues concerning the education of indigenous people. Our path is very long because a lot of change would be necessary. It would be, for example, necessary that you would build a policy for training the teachers who are already in classroom. The network that we have in schools in Brazil, they work well in the levels, in those levels. But when you talk about racism, we notice that that system doesn't work so well for indigenous people. Many indigenous I know have reported cases of racism they suffered into school. And when we go to reports, official reports about cases of racism, those reports are in a very small number. So we see that the cases are a lot, but when we talk about official reports, they are a few. So we have now a president that says that our indigenous backwarded. It's not good to see how see that the progress we made is not going forward. Well, those reports would be tools for us to think about the situation, and it would be useful for us to understand how we could build better public policies. Of course, we should have done it many years ago, but it would be a good point to start from. And thinking about the reports as tools, as instruments to measure racism, we know they don't reflect reality, but at least they mean something. And we have many other types of violence and aggressions against indigenous people. We could, using those cases, we would have a material to build different policies, thinking of the cases of indigenous people at schools in Brazil. I mean, we had 56 cases of racism in many decades. So it reflects the reality, no, but it shows something. And it's important for us to build a mechanism to deal with the situation. And I believe this is the biggest problem of racism in Brazil, because we sometimes pretend we don't have a racism in Brazil, but it's not the case. We know that. I've spoke a lot, but it was necessary.
Muito obrigada, Rodrigo.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo. I thanked him in an indigenous language. And this was a word in Tupi-Guarani. And now I'd like to share a question that was asked by Shruti Mehta. I don't know if I have pronounced his name correctly. This question is addressed to Sylvia, and this question goes like this. Where do you think the teachers you have interviewed in your research, where do you think they brought this sense, the perspective they have? Why those teachers, they mind about the social issues you have addressed? So where their knowledge, their background, their motivation come from?
Okay, well, obrigada, muchas gracias. Thank you very much for the question. Yes, I mean, it's an interesting question because it's at the core of my study. Well, the different ways that they are trying to, to include pedagogical practices or social justice approach to how the reappraise of the language, in this case, Quechua language, in the case of teachers who are working in bilingual education, for example, through how the inclusion of songs, poems, to how creative methodologies. I had the chance to visit schools, to observe the session, the classes, where these teachers were applying these creative methodologies. And the idea is to, to develop this sense of belonging, to be proud of their culture, in this case, the Quechua culture, to learn about the history. And it resonates, when Jessica presented the video, referring to the case of Argentina and Chile, talking about Mapuches. Yes, in Peru, in Bolivia, in many countries in South America, we are facing with this, neoliberal, pressure, because in the case of these teachers, they are aware of these, pressures, and but this is an interesting thing to say. At the same time, they say, oh, we cannot, be out of the school system because we know that it's a neoliberal system. But we can do like a revolutionary thing to try to include, these different knowledges, especially, the native knowledges, as part of our, teaching. And yes, through how the inclusion of this creative methodology, it's a way of resistance. It's a way, to encourage students to be more critical, to develop or to raise this, critical awareness of the world. And this is a way to, I think, from their discourses, to be, aligned with these social movements, like indigenous movements in Bolivia, in Peru, in Chile, in Argentina as well. And, critical position to say, so we are aware of colonization, so, but what about our ancestors? Because I remember like a quotation from one teacher, he told me, well, see, let's see, because most of these students don't know about, for example, their surnames history. So they have, as in Chile or Ecuador, they have Quechua surnames or Mapuche surnames in Chile, for example. And sometimes they feel bad, for having these surnames. But as a critical educator, as a social justice educator, I am trying, to let them know that they need to be proud of these origins. They need to be proud of their surnames, because it's a way of resistance as well. But you need first to know about the history of your surname, because this is a way of resistance that I can exemplify from these interviews. And thank you again for the question.
Thank you. I'll call Maria Fernanda again. We had
Sí.
another.
Então vamos lá.
Contesto a la pregunta que hacen. Bueno, ahí
Shall I answer the question? Well, they were asking me about education and how to act from education from the intersectional point of view. I think that the way out is partly in reinforce the counter-hegemonic processes, talking about Paulo Freire to answer this question. And in that sense, social movements and Aboriginal peoples have auto-education processes, but at the same time, the intercultural educational programs have to have more acknowledged from public policies. In Argentina, we don't have intercultural education law, for example. So I think we should advance that way, because if not, we can not counter the Eurocentrism regarding the possibility of understanding our ancestries, as Silvia said, to think from these labels and the concepts from which Aboriginal peoples understand reality. We need to advance, to make progress, to achieve that regarding public policies, intercultural policies, and also acknowledge the educational projects in the social movements in Latin America that are huge regarding political education. I don't know if that answers the question, but I think we need to strengthen the projects, the social projects, and how to meet the challenge of racism and hate speeches. We have to have policies regarding communication means that have huge power in our nowadays society. I don't know if that answers the question. And also regarding intersectionality, I think that's a paradigm that we have that is in our hands, the possibility to promote pedagogical projects that embrace these perceptions. In Chile, we have those kind of projects in public policy. In Santiago, in Colombia, we also can see some projects regarding intersectional perceptions. I think that curriculum justice is a very important concept to be related with this intersectional paradigm. And also in education, we cannot allow the isolation of the subject. We have to have a comprehensive view of oppressions and also of resistances.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And we had another question in the chat for Sylvia. I don't know if Sylvia was able to get it. Do you want to answer right now, please?
Yeah, of Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks, Brian, for asking. Well, I was talking a bit about how this social justice, or how these teachers are, teaching social justice, critical pedagogies. So I can add a bit more. Yeah, just, to say that, yeah, it's they are implementing, or they are trying, to implement critical pedagogies using different resources, more, beyond this formal, the formal curriculum has specific, tasks and researches, and these teachers are trying, to be more critical in a way, to promote this critical conscientiousness, if we would like to use again this Freudian, word. And well, I mean, there is an interesting point in the question Brian asked about, is critical pedagogy part of the teacher training program in Peru? So it's not part, it's a good question, because, as many countries, at least in South America, we have a formal curriculum, which is, I mean, I must say, to be fair, that at least in Peru, in the last 10 years, the curriculum was trying to include more creative methodologies, but not exactly including Paulo Freire or other critical approaches. So this is a claim that most teachers, at least the teachers that I interviewed as part of my fieldwork, that they said that this is part of their claims, because the initial training, to become a teacher, has weaknesses, and as part of this initial training, the teachers are only trained as in a very formal curriculum, with very formal way of teaching that is not necessarily critical. And I must say that even this, curriculum, which is not trying to, or the curriculum is not necessarily including this critical or revolutionary perspective. They are also trying to implement this. But I must say that obviously they are not representing the majority of teachers. Of course, they are only a few, I must say. My study obviously is qualitative. The idea is not to generalize, to have, but, even it's qualitative, it has, I mean, hopefully I will have this, this richness to show how these pedagogies can be, at the end, trying to reappraise the native culture, in this case, Quechua. I focused on Quechua and bilingual education, because the teachers are aware of this, rapid changes, or fast changes in the world. They are trying, to promote children to speak, for example, in this case, Spanish, and then English, another, Western language, which is part of this, neoliberal model. And what about, the native languages? What about the languages of in different parts of South America or Latin America, Mapuches, Quichuas, Aymaras, and also the Amazon, it's important. We know that for Brazil as well, but Peru, we have also Amazon, the Amazon region. So what about Shipibo Conibo, for example, languages, which are part of the culture? And well, it's, I must say again, that it's a way of resistance. It's a way of trying to formulate the uncomfortable questions, because we know that it is part of these uncomfortable approaches. And for me, it's a way to resist as well. It's a way not to be, in your comfort zone, and to go beyond, well, these still dominant perspectives. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. Does anyone has another thoughts and comments or questions they'd like to share through the chat? I should remind you to fill in the attendance list. It's very important for the certificates. And I should also, I'd like to share with you some comments from the organization. That one of them, it's not very open to a wider, I think, international audience, especially Anglophone or maybe Spanish speakers. But we have this book we mentioned it yesterday, that's being launched by Universidade Emancipa by celebrating the centennial of Paulo Freire last year. We have edited a book on the Paulo Freire Centennial course organized by Universidade Emancipa. And this book is in pre-sale. It will be printed in December, but if you buy in the pre-sale, it can be bought with a discount. So in case anyone is interested in that book, I'm going to share with you in the chat. So I'll just say this announcement while anyone might want to have shared any thoughts. I think it was very interesting that all the presentations, they were addressing somehow social movements that or either have been or are right now challenging the state in many ways. I think it was a very rich interchange of different contexts and different countries. Each presentation from a different country, actually, and that's not only Latin American but also India. So we could share different perspectives from decoloniality, and I think it's very rich for us. Sometimes language can be a barrier, which we have all witnessed that in the session, for which I apologize deeply. I hope I wasn't inconvenient for any of you or didn't bring much of a disturbance. But in case anyone doesn't have any question, which I call again, anyone, please. I'd like to, we do have. Brian. Brian has another question for Sylvia, or a comment. Yeah, a question. It sounds like you were suggesting the colonial history of Peru, which oppresses indigenous identity and language has been largely passed on the present day. I'd like to know why this is still the case. Also, I wonder how the teaching of one's mother tongue can inherently make students more critical. That's a nice provocation, I'd say. So Sylvia, please.
Yeah, let me read again. Now, if I understand. Yeah. Well, absolutely. Thanks, Brian, for asking, and yes, for raising new questions, which are really useful, especially for us. I mean, I am a doctoral student, so I really appreciate this kind of questions to reach my study, of course. Yeah, exactly. It's still, the colonial history in Peru, well, formally, we had independence in 1821 during the 19th century, but there is a new way, obviously, of colonialism, call it as neocolonialism, which are, oppressing, for example, the native cultures throughout racism. Some of us have mentioned racism as part of this, colonial legacy. So yes, it's the case because the educational system in Peru is very segregated. So the very few, the privileged people, can access, a private education. Who usually it costs, it has a very huge fees. For example, if you are poor, like most indigenous are, you cannot access to this education. And at the same time, this, as I think is similar or quite similar in different countries in Latin America, at least, the majority of these privileged people are white people, and what about the indigenous communities? So when they, for example, move or migrate to the capital city, which is Lima in Peru, they suffer, or they are discriminated, by this this elite, which are in control of the educational system, and this is the legacy. It's is permanent, and I would like to add, for example, yes, the ethnicity is one variable that affects, not only the level of education but also the inclusion or being part of the Peruvian state or the Peruvian the country. But I will like to add, for example, the gender variable. If you are poor and indigenous, and if you're a woman or a girl, you're in the wars, you know, in the at the bottom of this kind of ladder, you know, which is which is terrible, you know, if we are talking about social justice, because this is totally unfair. So yeah, and you are, yes, you were wondering how the teaching of one mothers, exactly, because yes, historically, you know, if you speak a native language, you are in this, you know, at the bottom, you know, you are discriminated because of your language, your culture. But what about if Peruvians, because I am Peruvian, I must say that my origins are in the rural areas of Peru. My parents come from the rural areas in Peru. I cannot speak Quechua, which is a shame for me. I was born in Lima, but I am very proud of my rural origins. I'm really proud of my rural roots. But at the same time, I can understand, but it's not my, you know, my goal, at least for me as an educator, as a critical researcher, to say that, oh, you only need to learn Spanish and English and French and so on. Because if you lose your identity, you know, you lose your culture. So you will not be very proud of your identity. So there is, you know, for most students and parents as well, they are trying to say, no, I don't like to, you know, to speak Quechua because it's not part of this, you know, global war. And you say, why are you saying this? Because as a result of coloniality, as a result of this, you know, difficult past, you learned, you know, this, the only, I mean, I would say the wrong side of history, you know, because you learn that, oh, you need to be, you know, you don't need to be proud of your language because of this colonialism. You need to understand that colonialism is still exercising pressure, is still, you know, exercising dominance, but you need to be proud of this because it's part of your identity. It's part of being Peruvian. Because Peruvians, we are diverse. And if you lose that, what about, you know, our legacies? So, and well, I think I am very committed to social justice perspective, not only, you know, to offer my doctoral thesis, but also, you know, to contribute to this debate and not to, you know, to be in this position to say, okay, so we need to remove bilingual education, or we need to remove this and only focus on Spanish, you know, model of education and try to, I'm sorry for the translation, but the word in Spanish is castellanización, which is, you know, to try to remove or eliminate all the native languages and promote the Spanish as castellanización, Hispanización, you know. But well, it's an open debate, but it's a good question, you know, to continue on this.
Thank you, Sylvia, for this wonderful approach. That was very nice to hear you. And I'd like to invite anyone for a final comment, maybe, before we have a picture of this this great session that was very, very rich. And so in case anyone who joined us later, I saw we had some people who maybe were coming from another session. They will be welcome to have any question too. In case anyone doesn't want to put anything forward, I'd like to call everyone to open their cameras. I'd remove these spotlights in order for everyone to be in a photo, okay? So it was great. I'll just shoot that in 1, 2, 3. Give us a smile then. So thanks everyone for that. It was, despite the confusion I might have caused, it was a wonderful session. And I'm so glad that I have the opportunity to share this moment with you. And thank you, everyone. Please share your contacts in order for us to see you again, to talk to you again. And we hope to see you in our next session. And I'd invite also people I'd like to thank before you go, especially for the N Libras and the Quixote team, which were fabulous. I'm so sorry for any disturbance I might have caused, but I'd like to personally thank to Nani and Claudia from NF Libras and Andreina Mazil, Raquel Mazil, Amauri, Claudia, Gabriela, Marcelo, and Fernanda for your amazing work here. You are great. Thank you for making this accessible for so many people, despite any confusion I might have caused. That was my fault. I'm so sorry for that. So thank you, everyone. Have a nice evening.
Thank you very much for having us.
And please, people from the translation, if you can stay for 3 minutes in order for me to apologize and talk a little bit with you, I'd ask you to do so, please.
Thank you for everyone, for the comments, for the sharing. It was amazing. See you.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias por habernos dado la oportunidad. Thanks for the opportunity. It's a really, really nice conversation. Obrigada.
Pessoalmente, com esse trabalho com várias línguas.
Obrigada, gente.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias.
Obrigada, gente.
Bye.
Tchau.
Tchau.